This epic love story revolves around the KGB lieutenant, General Yevgraf Zhivago, and his search for the daughter of his half-brother, Dr. Yuri Zhivago, and Laura Antipova. Set against the backdrop of pre-World War I years, World War I itself, the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Russian Civil War, and the Stalinist era, this film tells the story of Yuri Zhivago, a man torn between his love for two women while caught in the disorderly course of 20th century Russia. This is Dr. Zhivago.
Part 1. Government Structure and Historical Events. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was a series of two revolutions, beginning in February of that year, which overthrew the imperial government. The second revolt took place in October and placed the Bolsheviks in power. By 1917, governmental corruption and inefficiency were rampant. The Russian Empire's many ethnic minorities grew increasingly restive under Russian domination. But it was the government's inefficient prosecution of World War I that finally provided the challenge the old regime could not meet. Ill-equipped and poorly led, Russian armies suffered catastrophic losses in campaign after campaign against German armies. After 3 years of fighting, Russia withdrew from the war, leading to civil war between the Bolsheviks, the Reds, and the imperial government, the Whites, for the duration of 5 years. Years later, Joseph Stalin emerged, implementing his large-scale purge of the Communist Party known as the Great Purge, resulting in a catastrophic number of deaths.
Russia's imperial government, centered first in Moscow, was a system of 12 groups, all under the rule of the Tsar. The influential Russian Orthodox Church was subordinated to state authority when its ruling patriarchate was replaced by lay leadership.
As a result of the first two revolts, Emperor Nicholas II's government was replaced by a provisional government in February of 1917. The second revolt, which took place in October of that year, shifted power from the Romanov dynasty of 1613 to 1917 after the execution of the royal family by the Bolsheviks. This new regime of factions favored an end to the form of government nurtured by the last czars. Over the next 5 years, civil war erupted with a constant power struggle between the Reds and Whites. In 1922, the Communist Red Army emerged victorious and established the Soviet Union. Vladimir Lenin was voted in as the chairman of the Council of People's Commissaries of the USSR in 1922. After Lenin's death 2 years later, Joseph Stalin gained power of the Soviet Union, implementing a dictatorship rule through communism. Part 2. Accuracies and Inaccuracies. Accuracies.
Between 1918 and 1922, typhus caused at least 3 million deaths out of 20 to 30 million cases in Russia, as well as Poland and Romania. In the film, Dr. Zhivago was called up to treat typhus during World War I, and with its return to Moscow, starvation is rampant due to the lack of food and resources available. 3 years into World War I, 1 million Russian soldiers had been killed. They were ill-equipped and outnumbered, becoming overwhelmed with burdens of defense, which would ultimately result in economic downfall for the Russians. This was a major strain on the Russian population, but also served as a direct threat to military expenditure. This is depicted through the Pasha's involvement in the war and how they were cut down by German guns. The lack of resources is also shown through the number of wounded in the war hospital that Zhivago and Laura work in.
Russia had been in turmoil for years, represented through revolution in the streets of Moscow. People are marching for communism and are cut down by Cossacks. When Zhivago comes home to a stripped and sullen Moscow, it's a world he no longer recognizes. His home is gone, inhabited by communist-enforced housing laws. The politics are uncertain, starvation and disease are rampant, and he can't even keep his family warm. This was a homecoming experienced by a lot of soldiers. The fear and confusion that all of the characters share is emblematic of how Russians must have felt at the time.
To create the authenticity of the location, 2 full-scale 1920 Moscow streets were created, taking 18 months to build. Unlike other sets, the Moscow recreation was not a long facade propped up by wood. Lean's team essentially created homes with fully furnished interiors that could be used for filming.
The film was adapted by Boris Pasternak's novel of the same name and was completed in 1956. It had to be smuggled out of the Soviet Union and published by an Italian, spending 26 weeks atop New York Times bestsellers list. In 1958, Pasternak was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, mainly for his work on Zhivago. While this story is a reflection of the Stalin Revolution, Pasternak does an excellent job of relating his experiences to those of Zhivago's himself, creating a more believable character. Inaccuracies.
During the protest scenes and the subsequent attack of the soldiers, it's supposed to be a bitterly cold night, but there are no visible breath clouds from humans or horses, which proves that the scenes were filmed in a very warm environment. Spies, secret police, censored poetry, and the party are largely emphasized for the purpose of drama. If you couldn't guess from the history mentioned earlier, the Bolsheviks were far too busy in 1917 to hunt dreamy dissidents like Yuri Zhivago. Although they were fanatics, they allowed enough freedom so that a poet like Zhivago could publish his work without fear of persecution. This, however, helps to create the conflict for Zhivago, adding to the storyline.
The Urals are gradually rising mountains, without snow-capped peaks visible from flat places, making the scene inaccurate to the true landscape. Part 3. Geographical Features. Zhivago's story begins when he moves to Moscow and begins his training to become a doctor in the years before the Great War. This post-revolution era created a beautifully colored upper-class city, mixed with the contrast of the slums. The rounded peaks of buildings, laced with snow, is the perfect backdrop for revolution amongst the lower class, wielding the vibrant red of communism.
After the outbreak of war, Zhivago was recruited for a military hospital in a village on the Western Front. Here, Laura and him fall in love. Across the center of Europe, Laura's fiancé Pasha fights for Russia on the Eastern Front, depicting the hardships of the Russian army. The snow is constant, soldiers are starving and ill-equipped, and they face a far more superior German force. After a failed charge to the barren and blown-up field, they are easily gunned down. This situation occurred for many regiments across Europe, eventually leading to Russia leaving the war effort in 1917.
When Zhivago arrives home, he is met with a world he no longer knows. Color and laughter are replaced with the bleak and destructive civil war. Moscow at this time was a central location for the Bolshevik rule, causing Zhivago and his family, along with many others, to travel north to farmland. They take refuge just outside the fictional city of Yuriatin, based on Perm, in the Urals. This beautiful farmland goes on for miles and is overlooked by the Ural Mountains. Here, amongst the wildflowers and open sky, Zhivago rekindled with his wife and son after 3 years of separation from the war.
The Ural Mountains, or simply the Urals, are a mountain range that runs approximately from north to south through western Russia. They have rich resources, including metal ores, coal, and precious and semi-precious stones. Years later, a broken and tired Zhivago comes back to Moscow, changed by the Stalinist era. The colors are gone, replaced by simplistic grays, browns, and blacks, representing the hard times of agriculture and industrial work.
Finishing the film as it started, the El de la Vila Dam, located on the border of Spain and Portugal, is the perfect backdrop for a happy ending to this epic film, tying up the whole film again with Yevgraf trying to prove that Tanya is Yuri and Laura's daughter. As Tanya leaves, Yevgraf notices that she carries a baleka, an instrument that Yuri's mother was renowned for playing. Questioning her further, he learns that Tanya has a gift with the instrument, thereby implying that she is their daughter after all. This happy moment is emphasized by the rainbow arching over the cascading water. Part 4. Film Techniques.
Directed and cinematographed by Mr. David Lean, the highly acclaimed director, Zhivago captures the breathtaking scenery, snow-capped mountains, a frozen palace, and the turmoil streets of Moscow.
The movie begins in a very somber mood. Yevgraf is shown as a high-ranking officer looking down from a glass window in a darkened tunnel as the employees slowly start streaming in, using a high-angled shot to create power over the communists.
The movie goes back into flashbacks and covers 2 eras, pre- and post-revolution. The houses of the upper class of Russia at the beginning are framed with rich tapestries and curtains and are saturated with deep reds signifying luxury. They are brightly lit, such as a house for the Christmas celebration.
A very effective tool in the film's cinematography are the use of windows. It has been used a number of times to suggest 2 different worlds on both sides, creating a transparent barrier. Yuri sees Laura for the first time through a window and instantly finds her beautiful. Later on, the audience looks at Laura confiding about her affair to Pasha from across the window, and then she almost looks at the camera, suggesting that she caught the audience listening.
The street lights and the moonlight illuminating the peace marchers and the Tsar soldiers mounted on horse at the 2 ends of the road give the scene a sense of foreboding and fear for the marchers. The effect of their clash is also shown through the emotions of the dimly lit face of Yuri, a witness to the extreme atrocity and the beginning of the revolution.
Wide-angle shots of the war show the army shivering in the cold and the dead soldiers frozen in the snow. One shot that stands out in the war scene is through Pasha's broken glasses lying on the ground after a bomb explodes near him. The scene brilliantly depicts the lack of resources available to the Russian army at the time and gives the audience a very real reason why they left the war. Sunset, with a snowy steam train chugging along in the foreground, a sleigh ride on the snow in Brinkino leading to the ice palace, and innumerable shots of the beautiful landscape create a happy connection to snow.
Tracking shots have been used especially to follow people of importance, as in the case of Pasha entering the Christmas party or Yevgraf coming inside Yuri's home in Moscow after the revolution.
Yuri's journey through Russia has an epic feeling because he travels through a world that is in striking contrast to himself.
He remains uncorrupted by violence surrounding him and wishes to find a place away from it all, which drives him from Moscow to Siberia and eventually back to Moscow.
He is a poet and doctor who remains hopeful until the end, earning this movie an 8 out of 10. The beautiful scenery, mixed with history and an enthralling love story, led to 5 Academy Awards, and as of 2016, is the 8th highest grossing film of all time.
However, the length of the movie, at almost 3.5 hours long, made it difficult to pay attention. The love story between Zhivago and Lara trivialized the events of the Russian Revolution and the resulting civil war.
While it made for a very interesting and action-packed story, there was not as much of a historical base as we would have liked to see.